course, about what happened with Ebrahim Rasool, now our former ambassador to the US, after being declared persona non grata after insinuating that US President Donald Trump was the leader or was leading a supremacist movement. This really relates to, I presume, white supremacy, both in the United States and around the world. Dr Oscar van Heerden is an expert and academic in international relations. Peter Fabricius is a foreign affairs journalist writing for various publications. Both join us now. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for your time. I do appreciate it. Dr van Heerden, if I may put this to you first. Rasool was speaking last week while he was an ambassador when he made the comments that he did. Was he right? Should he have said what he said?
You know, Stephen, the truth of the matter is that ambassadors get invited to various think tanks, academic institutions, and asked about their impressions on a number of things. The action that the State Department has taken against Ambassador Rasool suggests that in those forums, ambassadors are not supposed to actually give astute analysis, correct analysis of what the question is. And the question in this regard was trying to get to grips with understanding President Trump himself, but also the policies that he is pursuing. And I think that Ambassador Rasool gave a fair and honest analysis of how he thinks and what he thinks the problematic is and how it should be engaged. Now, of course, those elements were not mentioned. They only lifted the pieces that they needed to actually do the expulsion or justify the expulsion. But the truth is that the ambassador was also saying in the same talk that we need to engage with the Trump administration, that there needs to be mutual respect, that they don't need to be megaphone diplomacy, and so on and so forth. But that's not what they wanted to hear.
Peter Fabricius, do you agree with that? I mean, I can't remember, I don't think we've had an ambassador expelled from another country since 1994. Is this just the US sort of, being the US? Is this about the Trump administration censoring freedom of speech or censoring opinions they don't like?
Yeah, it's a bit of both, actually, Stephen. I mean, I do disagree with Oscar in the sense that, an ambassador, I'm afraid, is by nature obliged to be somewhat, if you like, hypocritical in the sense of holding back on criticism, very sharp criticism of his host country. That happens everywhere. It happens here. It happens, around the world. I've been dealing with diplomats for years and years and years, and they're all almost to a person, if not all, will refuse to give you public criticism about their host country. And when it does come out, it causes problems. We've had problems in this country of some document that Western ambassadors wrote critical of the government years and years ago, and they were all drawn in for a démarche and so on and so forth. No one was expelled. I mean, I think the reaction of the US is excessive. Let me not, create any confusion about that. And I also think that the analysis that he gave was quite close to the mark. But I really think that in the context of a talk in which he himself was saying, we have to be very cautious here. If I go out and make, sort of silly bugger remarks, as he put it, then you'd be justified in recording me. I mean, somehow he wasn't quite consistent with his own warning. Sure, that's also a question of context, but that I think as an ambassador, I'm afraid you really have to be quite careful what you say publicly.
I mean, Dr. van Heerden, there's so much going on here, right? And we all know kind of what this is about. I mean, the Trump administration, the people within it, and President Trump himself do seem to have picked out us, South Africa, for special treatment. And I can think we can all work out why that is.
No, absolutely. I mean, and that is really the question. I understand that people obviously want to concentrate on what Ambassador Rasool said, the context in which he said it, and whether he should or should not have shared those analysis and so forth. I do think in a country where democracy, free speech, and diplomacy is the way, I do agree with Peter that the action is excessive to expel instead of engaging. But evidently, the Trump administration does not want to engage with the democratically elected government. They are stalling, they are keeping the door shut, and in the meantime, they are meeting with other groupings and stakeholders in the South African context, be it racist, right-wing, conservative groupings such as AfriForum and Solidarity, or whether it is with the official opposition. The question we must ask is, how does one respond to a situation where foreign policy and diplomacy has been weaponized by the Trump administration, including trade has been weaponized. Punitive actions, bullying, and so on is the order of the day with the Trump administration. And as an ambassador, when South Africa is in the firing line, and you are correct, we are in the firing line for very specific reasons. Let's be clear that Marco Rubio and the Trump administration has been waiting and wanting to find a reason to expel a Muslim pro-Palestinian ambassador that is in DC. And unfortunately, as Peter says, Ambassador Rasool gave them that reason by publicly sharing those views and so on a public platform. But I do think we mustn't lose focus on who we are dealing with. We need to understand that Trump and their policies, he wants to rule through decree with all these executive orders, and that requires an honest analysis. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But when you are, they are targeting, Stephen, South Africa for two reasons, I argue. One, through this excessive action, they are saying to all embassies in DC, toe the line, shut up, support the King Trump and his policies, or the same will happen to you, regardless of the Vienna Conventions and so on and so forth, and diplomatic practices. The second reason is that we want to make an example of the junior, weakest partner within the BRICS formation, and we want to show the BRICS Plus members, not the Big Five, but the BRIC Plus members, toe the line, or we will do the same to you that we are doing to South Africa. And I unfortunately think that it's going to get more punitive, and we are going to be excluded from AGOA, and we are going to have more sanctions to compete with. And I hope that the Trump administration, the Ramaphosa administration is going to be ready and be proactive and not reactive.
I mean, Peter, this really gets to the heart of the problem, doesn't it? I mean, I think Dr. van Heerden must be correct. We are going to see the US doing this to us. They're going to do it to other countries too. Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if, 3.5 years from now, we find that the Trump administration has expelled more ambassadors than ever before in American history. This is how it's going to be. They are big. I agree that they are bullying. How do we as South Africa stand up to them? Or do we just get behind China and hope they do it for us?
Yeah, look, it does present a real problem. And so, for example, what do we do? How do we appoint an ambassador now who's going to be acceptable? How do we accept a U.S. ambassador who's likely, this article, this decision was based on an article by Joel Pollack, who's the South African-born editor-in-chief of Breitbart News. I mean, I disagree with Mistra. I must tell you that it was quoted out of context, unless you're talking about the very, very broader context. But the report that Breitbart News did, for all its faults, and there are many, did kind of more or less accurately reflect what he said about white supremacists and so on, supremacy. But, some people think that he might be the guy who Trump nominates as the ambassador, U.S. ambassador to South Africa. I mean, I have heard from Washington insiders that he's been mainly punting that argument himself. But let's say that that Trump says, okay, we'd like you to give us Agramar for Joel Pollack as ambassador. What do we do? Do we say, oh, great, we love him? Or do we say, look at all the nasty things he said about South Africa. Sorry, we don't accept him. And then there'll be some other retaliation. So it's quite difficult to know how to navigate this. But I mean, certainly in terms of his own advice, though, that he gave in that same seminar, as Oscar points out, we have to be extremely cautious. I mean, whatever we do. I mean, he was saying, Rasool, we need to be transactional. He quoted the example of Zelensky's fight with, Vance and Trump, and said we shouldn't come to the White House and we'll come to the US and offer these, counter arguments. We should offer something, something transactional. And, so by his own advice, I don't think, with great respect for him, and I do respect for his analysis and so on, he shouldn't have said that,
Dr. van Heerden, the next question is going to be, who do we send to replace him, right? Now, it might be tempting, sometimes it is if you're dealing with a bully, to find something to please the bully. If it is indeed the case that Joel Pollak becomes the American ambassador, or the nominee by the Trump administration to South Africa, would it be tempting to appoint his former boss, a former ambassador, Tony Leon, as our ambassador to the United States? Would be a good national coalition moment, maybe?
Look, I mean, I've actually made that note. I said perhaps if it is a white male from the DA, it would be acceptable to the Trump, Marco Rubio coterie. So that's not far off the mark, because I do think, and it's not the subject for our discussion today, but I do think we need to spend some time in asking the question about DA culpability with regards to what the DA did and discussed with the Trump administration when they were in the United States. Of course, there was a terse statement and so on, but I don't think it is far-fetched, Stephen, to assume that besides the race-based policies and legislation, which clearly they identified with each other in that meeting, they would have also spoken about Israel and the case that South Africa took to the ICJ. And equally, I don't think it's far-fetched that the U.S. representative might have asked the DA delegation, what do you make of the South African ambassador here in D.C.? And we know the colorful history that Rasool has with the DA in the Western Cape and so on and so forth. So I do think that, perhaps a Tony Leon or someone of that sort would be pliable for the U.S. But having said that, no one that we send as South Africa, whether we talk of seasoned diplomat and an experienced diplomat, etc., is going to muster and satisfy the Trump, Musk, Rubio.
I think that must be true. Peter, there's this funny thing that's happening now where suddenly we're having, and I can't really believe that we're having this, we're having a conversation around the ethnic identity of a person we want to send as an ambassador. It shouldn't matter, but in a way, Trump has succeeded in making it matter. And I'm sure the fact that Ebrahim Rasool identifies in many ways personally with people in Palestine is a big factor in this. And it shouldn't matter, but now Trump has succeeded in making it matter.
Yeah, no, that is extremely unfortunate. I agree with what Oscar said much earlier on. They were gunning for Rasool before this, and there were a lot of articles written about, I think probably exaggerating his support for, the Palestinian cause, saying that he's pro-Hamas and pro this and pro that, pro-terrorism, etc. And so if he hadn't handed over his credentials in the last days of the Biden administration, it's conceivable that he might not have been acceptable at all from day one. But you're right. We shouldn't be talking about the race or or even, to that matter, the precise political stance of our ambassador. But, some of that does happen in diplomacy. I wonder if the DA would accept that position in this context. I think when they went over there with their delegation, they were trying to persuade the Trump people that, look, we don't like the Expropriation Act either very much, but we can tell you that there has not been seizure of land under that act, and there are, legal protections and so on. And that argument was simply rejected completely by the MAGA people. So, I think it's only fair to say that what they said in private, who knows? But yeah, I totally agree with you. It shouldn't require such a kind of careful choice of the ideology and ideology perhaps, but not the race of our ambassador. But so it's hard to see who would be acceptable actually at this point.
Dr. van Heerden, at some point, and you've made the point, and I think many have made the point, that Trump is a bully. How do you stand up to someone like that? It's very difficult to do. We, and I hate to say it, but we, and particularly because of PEPFAR, need the US more than they need us. There are very few levers that we have. We may have some levers. We're a lot like Canada. They need the US more than Canada, than the US needs Canada. But Canada does have the lever of being able to switch off hydroelectricity. We can't do that to the United States.
Yeah, no, the levers open to us in this diplomatic spat, unfortunately, is multilateralism. It is international institutions. It is the rules-based international order. I think that the South African government needs to remain principled, operate within the confines of international the international rules, and call for dialogue and remain principled in the fact that there is a multilateral system and that we will find expression. We need to approach the US through the African Union, through the BRICS formations, through the non-aligned movement, and through our bilateral arrangements with the European Union. This is the only way we're going to be able to muster some kind of defense against the bullying of the Trump administration. But if we think we're going to take them on one-on-one, obviously we are but a mere speck in comparison to the might of the United States economy and the United States influence. I also do think, Stephen, that we talk of an international envoy that is supposed to, one, engage with the US, but we also, the starting point for me is meeting with, we must make a clear distinction between the Trump administration, the Trump government, and business, USA businesses, the 600 companies that is here involved in South Africa on the stock exchange. We need to start with them because we mustn't think that there is some convergence between the Trump administration and US business interest in South Africa.
Sure.
This is not, for example, a situation where when Trump is going to institute sanctions, all US companies are going to obey and withdraw.
Sure.
I think that is a mistake. I think that there's a lot of dissent in the United States against the Trump administration, not only from the opposition, the Democrats, but also non-state actors,
Sure.
the NGO sector, and so on and so forth. So I think that should be the starting point. But we do need to do within the context of institutions and multilateralism.
Dr. Oscar van Heerden, really appreciate the time. Thank you. An expert in academic and international relations, Peter Fabricius, a man with immense experience reporting on the behaviour of diplomats over the years.